Let's make sure this is on. Test 1, 2, 3. Okay. Good. Whew. Hello, hello. Hi. That's okay. You go whenever. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. Yeah. Go and make yourself at home. Mr. President. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, yes, indeed. Nah, I can't. That's okay. But I turned the air off. I just turned it off, but what I think what we learned is that it doesn't turn off on a dime. It honestly, it wasn't even set to some crazy temperature. It just, when it's fully on and there's no people in that building, it stays cold. So good. Clearly, you've been here before. That's good. All right, but we all figure out. There's some solution to that. Sure.
So, Manana, my feeling is always lean towards having in person. People who show up, they will show up.
Honestly, I didn't really watch carefully enough. Oh my God! What a surprise! Bonnie!
Yes.
Welcome. You guys remember Cantor Lawrence Mother Bonnie?
Hello.
Nice surprise and treat. What are you doing with us without her?
David, my boyfriend.
So nice to meet you. Welcome.
Good.
The wedding? You got a little
Relaxation.
relaxation?
We were out in Greenport for a few days.
Oh, nice.
So let's come out here. No Shabbat here. So.
Sorry, it's a little on the freezing side, but it was on way too much. But
No, it's so beautiful.
Vegas also. This is
Well, I've been here before.
Great.
Just
That's
it's
the one.
cold, right?
Yeah, no, you think so.
Exactly right. I know.
You won't do it.
So I didn't even get a chance to.
Is it okay now? It went really well.
Oh, they really want to.
It's not.
I'm in the business, so I know.
That's why I call it fit.
Luckily,
Okay.
Yeah, she said that was
a lot of
Words.
there were we had actually
So it happened during service, and the executive director went
Yeah. No,
air conditioning.
I said it's not finished.
No, I heard actually.
People actually stayed and they continued the service in the parking lot.
Oh, whatever. You see, that's I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. That's a really smart.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so maybe not for service that you want, in that environment.
But I went there second day.
Lucy is there.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Lauren and the students ran second day.
Oh.
Yeah.
What happens is, like when you're at that's what they do is actually great. A lot of congregations don't do it. They have it started.
Right.
And for us, my parents have told me they were service in that time. Just because it's usually only the people who really want to be there show up on day two. And it's a very different kind of vibe. So that they even in the big room and everything.
Yeah.
No doubt that she would have been.
Yeah.
I feel bad stealing you from Rabbi Gotti and Greenport. This is a wonderful guy. Trevor back there, that's the sitting over. Yeah, it's the only one. Yeah, I was gonna say. My folks for the last few years have rented that house. Farm house thing right on the water. This guy who owns, exactly what I was going to say. I don't think any of us did anything to do that anyway. Even worse. That first class, you know, the funny thing, being a middle child in this family, was that special school began my brother in high school began middle child just kind of floated in the ether there, but high school didn't exist at the time, you know, so we went to but it's quite a place. You ever been?
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. But I sort of jokingly say these days, I'm not sure it's true or not, but but where it started, you know, so they were showing all the pictures of original years and I just started thinking to myself, this is a different day. Nobody would let their kids go to school. We look like hippies running around here. And I just remember that's what it was in the 80s, you know, it looked like that, but I just in the mental image of it, so far removed from the present reality of what it is, that it's hard to sort of reconcile the distance between the two. It's great to meet you. Please make yourself at home. I know, sort of, because really the only times, right? Otherwise, we were here. I think when we filmed. Yes. So you're one of the few again on the inside of that story. But boy, it was a different kind of environment then.
Yes.
This was like the first restaurant before Mills. Good shot, it's you. Story for another time, but I'll tell it to you. Bonnie knows it as well as I do, so she could probably. All right. Oh, we got time. Oops. Okay. Yeah, I feel like one.
the same flowers?
No. Okay, because again, I know nothing about flowers, and all of a sudden these things appeared over there, and Well, we purposely request not smelly flowers. I think, because here's the thing, they asked us for opinion. This always comes from the lawyers. And so years ago they sent a different kind of thing, and it was very fragrant. So I forget which candle it was at the time, but it threw it. Yeah. And so I think that was, it might have been tomorrow, my first year, possibly. I don't remember exactly, but it was enough to throw them off for sure. So I figured after that, I was like, maybe we'll just leave that one to. It's an excellent question. It's an excellent question. I don't know the answer. You know what? I thought so, but I don't think that's it. For years we were using actually the florist who did our wedding, believe it or not, because she's this wonderful person who lives around the corner. But then COVID hit, and then I guess it reset itself, so I really have no idea. Oh, they're not over? Oh, boy. I actually hope that they're not coming out. Something that's going to say that you didn't say. They were the same people who carved the carousel, and they came over from Europe.
Why did you register? Oh, yeah.
Were dogs that were bred to look like lions. So there's like this kind of a dog with a flat face that Chinese bred. And those they had seen, and they thought that's what a lion is.
This is it. It's done. I love everybody else there. And granted, I wasn't expecting any miracles last night, right? I don't think anybody who expected us to win this give those 4 stars on a short schedule. No, look, that's the thing, right? They just like classic Giants. That actually, that game tonight, a couple plays would get me. Would have been a very different score. I still think neither of those ones are playing really good ball, but it really is like, one of those things where that game, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, if ever there was an example of redemption, watching those guys in the second in that game, it's really unbelievable. Right, so it's like, and usually, unless it's here where I don't top my body, usually end up having like service, you have really reset of an arrow and follow on both sides. Yesterday, and tangents in the car are the most exhausting goals. So it really is like, I used to love that book, and that was right. I still, we actually were in the best we've had for years. This one is we asked my brothers to see it and to build it like wood so it won't fall down. You anywhere you like, wherever you want to go.
How are you? Just my boyfriend.
Oh, like that. Yeah, I am the rabbi. But I want to steal that line. That's a great line. Yeah, sure, of course. But no, I understand.
No.
Oh, wow. Because the mark. Well, you will hear it in just a little bit. I hope I will do it justice. You'll tell me when to write that down. No, I hear that. Before we leave, who's you back?
Okay. Okay. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Gemar Chatima Tova, Shana Tova. Okay. So, everybody feeling refreshed? Not feeling exhausted at all in any way, shape, or form? Very exhausted. No, there's nothing exhausting. Nothing exhausting. So I think I say this every year. I'm always surprised. Whenever this service comes around, you figure everyone is fatigued. They need a Shabbos off, and they're going to find somewhere else to be. And here you all are tonight. Very much appreciate it. It's wonderful to see all of you. It's wonderful to begin this new year with such sweetness. Certainly, we have a serious holiday coming up. There's no question about that. But Shabbat Shuvah is still Shabbat. Okay, and so it's primary things, right? We know about the joyful piece, but those that were with us for Rosh Hashanah will know. The other very important part of Shabbat is Minucha, is this idea of rest. So if you took anything away from my sermon, this is the Shabbos to begin that work, right? Make sure that sometime over this Shabbat that you find a way to rest at least a little bit. But tonight, we're focusing on that joy and all that celebration. And for those that have never joined us for this service before, I will tell you at the outset, for the sake of your rabbi's brain, I think, which only has a certain number of sermons that is capable of producing in a couple-week period, we always do ask the rabbi during the sermon period tonight. So I want to tell you that now so you can start to think in your mind. But I'm going to limit you just a little bit, perhaps. Try to focus, if you have questions, on the high holiday period. I'll do my best to answer them. If I don't have an answer, I'll fake it till I make it. But, but if you have other burning questions, you certainly can ask them as well. Before we get started with our service, it's my honor to welcome up Margaret Bromberg to light and bless our Shabbat candles. As we all know, we'll lose Mike and Margaret back to Israel when? A week from tomorrow. So I wanted to make sure before we get that blessing in. Margaret, do you want me to help with the... It's something of that. It's also the blessing part. Amen. You certainly can if you'd like.
Thank you. Blessed art thou, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to kindle the light of Shabbat.
Amen. Thank you, Margaret. Okay, we'll turn in our prayer books, and you should hopefully have our regular Shabbat Sidurim in your pews. If for any reason you don't, raise a hand. We'll bring one over to you. But we're going to turn to page 130, and we'll sing together at the very top of the page, Psalm 95. Lechu ner hanena, lechu ner hanena, lechu ner hanena, l'Adonai. Lechu ner hanena, lechu ner hanena, lechu ner hanena, l'Adonai. Naria, naria, letzor ishenu, nekadma fanav vetodah. Naria, naria, letzor ishenu, bizmirot naria lo. Lechu ner hanena, lechu ner hanena, lechu ner hanena, l'Adonai. Lechu ner hanena, lechu ner hanena, lechu ner hanena, l'Adonai. We're now on page 131, Shiru Ladonai, at the very top of the page. Shiru Ladonai, Shiru Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol Haaretz, Shiru Ladonai, Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato, Shiru Ladonai, Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato. Shiru Ladonai, Shiru Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol Haaretz, Shiru Ladonai, Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato. Shiru Ladonai, Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato. We'll turn now to Or Zarua on page 132, just at the very bottom of the page in Hebrew. Or Zarua la tzadik, וליישרי לב שמחה. אור זרוע לצדיק, וליישרי לב שמחה. שמחו צדיקים באדוני, והודו לזכר קודשו. שמחו צדיקים באדוני, והודו לזכר קודשו. We'll turn now to page 134 at the very top. Zamru l'Adonai bechinor, bechinor v'kol zimra, b'chatzotzrot v'kol shofar. Hariu lifnei hamelech Adonai, Yiram hayam umlo'o, Tevel ve'yoshveva. Neharot imcha uchaf yachad, harim yiranenu. Lifnei Adonai kiva, lishbot haaretz, yishbot tevel betzedek, ve'hamim mesharim. Yiram hayam umlo, tevel ve'yoshveva. Neharot imcha uchaf yachad, harim yiranenu. We're now on page 135. Romemu is the last Hebrew paragraph just in the middle of the page. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu lehar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu lehar kodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu lehar kodsho. And we'll turn now to L'chad Odi on page 138, and we'll do all the paragraphs tonight. Again, rising for the final one, and for those that are with us in the room, facing towards the doors we walked in through, just in that direction. L'chad Odi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. 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 Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, Ishmi'anu el hamiuchad, Adonai echad u'shemo echad, l'shemo tiferet ve'litila. L'chad Odi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. L'chad Odi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, ki mekor haberacha, merosh mikedem nesucha, sof maaseh b'machshava tchila. L'chad Odi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. L'chad Odi likrat kala, פני שבת נקבלה, מקדש מלך עיר מלוכה, קומי צאי מתוך ההפכה, רב לך שבט בעמק הבכה, והוא יחמול עלייך חמלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. התנערי מעפר קומי, לבשי בגדי תפארתך עמי, על יד בן ישי בית הלחמי, קרבה אל נפשי גאלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. Let's see if I can remember the next melody. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. התעוררי כי באורך, קומי אורי שיר דברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לא תבושי ולא תקמי, מה תשתוכחי ומה תמי בך, יחסו עניי עמי ונבנתה עיר אל תילה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. והיו לשמסו שוסייך, ורחקו כל מבלייך, יסיס עלייך אלוהייך כמשוש חתן. כלה, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. ימין ושמאל תפרוצי בית אדוני, תריצי על יד איש בן פרצי ונשמחה. ונגילה, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. בואי בשלום, עטרת בעלה גם בשמחה, ובצולה תוך אמוני עם סגולה. בואי חלה, בואי חלה, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. יאי לי לי לי, היי לה 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 לה, יאי לי לי לי, היי לה 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 לה, היי לי לי לי, יא לה 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 יא לה לה, יאי לי לי לי, יא לה 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 לה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. Margaret, we're going to miss you. Marsha, you're going to have to do double the work to get everybody moving. Okay. Everyone, please be seated. We're going to turn now to the 92nd Psalm on page 140, Tzadik Katamar, just where the Hebrew indents in the middle of the page. Tzadik Katamar Yifrach Keres Balvanon Yizke Shetulim beveit Adonai bechatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu od yenuvun beseva deshenim verhananim yihu lehagin ki ashar Adonai tzuri velo havlatabo. Turn now to the Chatzi Kaddish on page 144. We'll rise in body or spirit. Yitkadal veyitkadash shemei rabba v'alma divrach cherutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael ba'galaha ba'galaha ubizman kariv veimeru amen. Yesh me rabba mevarach la'alam u'li'al me'al maya yitbarach yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudsha brichu leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata tamiran be'alma Beimeru. Amen. Remain standing for the Baruch Hu on page 146. Baruch Hu et Adonai hamevorach. Baruch Adonai hamevorach leolam vaed. Please be seated. We're going to read now together on the bottom of page 149 in English. This is an hour of change. Within it we stand uncertain on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or crossover? Umahavir yom umevilayla, umavdil ben yom uvelayla, Adonai tzvahot shemo, el chai v'kayam tamid yimloch aleinu leolam vaed, baruch atah Adonai, hamahari barahavim. We'll read now together on the bottom of page 150 in English. Everlasting love you offered your people Israel by teaching us Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts. Therefore, Adonai our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and your commandments. We will rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life, and doing them lengthens our days. Never remove your love from us. Praise to you, Adonai, who loves your people Israel. Ki ehem chayenu ve'orech yameinu v'hem negei yomam v'layla v'avatcha al tasir mimenu li'olamim baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Please join with me on page 154. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavcha u'bechol nafshecha u'bechol meodecha Ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele Asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha veshinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shiftecha b'veitecha u'v'lechtecha b'derech u'shochbecha u'kumecha u'kshartam leot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot bein einecha uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvihi sharecha leman tiskeru vasitem et kol mitzvotai veitem kedoshim leloechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim li'hod lachem lelohim ani Adonai Elohechem Adonai Elohechem emet. Let's read together in English on page 155. A little change of pace. Everybody goes back a page. You're so routinized now that you're already moving the page before I say it. Page 155. It's a beautiful read. Love your God with every heartbeat, with every breath, with every conscious act. Keep in mind the words I command you today. Teach them to your children. Talk about them at work, whether you are tired or you are resting. Let them guide the work of your hands. Keep them in the forefront of your vision. Do not leave them at the doorway of your house or outside your gate. They are reminders to do all of my mitzvot, so that you can be holy for God. I am Adonai, your God. I led you out of Egypt to become your God. I am Adonai, your God. As we turn to page 158, Michamocha at the very top of the page. Yabai bye bim bim bam, yabai bye bim bam, yabai bye bim bim bam, yabai bye bim bam, yai bye ba 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 bye, yabai bye bim bam, yai bye ba 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 bye, yabai bye bim bam. Mi chamocha bailim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar bakodesh, nor hatehilot osefel, nor hatehilot osefel. Yabai bye bim bim bam, yabai bye bim bam, yabai bye bim bim bam, yabai bye bim bam. Yai bye ba 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 bye, ya ba bye bye bim bam. Yai bye ba 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 bye, ya ba bye bye bim bam. Malchutecha ra'u vanecha, bokeam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam, zeli anu ve'amru, Adonai himloch leolam va'ed, v'nemar kifad Adonai et Yaakov, ugolo miad chazak mimenu, baruch at Adonai, gal Yisrael. Let there be love and understanding among us. A peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up, waiting to do your will. Hashkivenu is on the top of page 160. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom ve'hamidenu shomreinu lechaim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom ve'hamidenu shomreinu lechaim. Ushmor tzeiteinu, uvoeinu, lechaim u'shalom, me'ata ve'ad olam. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom, ve'hamidenu shomreinu lechaim. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel, whose shelter of peace is spread over us, over all your people Israel, and over Yerushalayim. As we turn to page 162 of Shamru at the very top of the page. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. עיני בהני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת, שבת ויהי נפש. Invite us now to rise in body or spirit as we begin the Amidah together, as we always do. From that point on, we will continue silently. Unless I'm mistaken, I think the only addition in the Amidah is on page 178. During the period of time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we add a special section into the prayer for peace, Shalom Rav, which begins with the words B'Sefer Chaim. You'll see it indicated for Shabbat Shuvah and on page 178. So again, we'll begin together and then continue silently from there. As always, please go at your own pace, and when you're finished, at the end, you may be seated. Adonai sefatai tiftachu fi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Ose shalom bimromav, uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel. Yase shalom, yase shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yahase shalom, yahase shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Please be seated. We'll turn now to page 371 to offer our Misha Berach this evening. Begin by thinking of those in our community who we know who are in need of healing. Betsy Tepper, Allison Luckman, Malka Bat Chaya Sura, Michael Klinghofer, Ame and Warren Cass, Rivka Bat Rachel, Leah Bat Naomi, Lorraine Danis, David Dowling, Sivya Devora Bat Francis, Muriel Hirsch, Michelle Sawicki, Francis Kirschman, Shelley Newmark, Diane Axelrod, Gabriella Spicer, Barbara Kushner, David Kyle Klopman, Lorraine Davis, Bonnie Mahoney, Richard Busbang, Lori Nisanoff, Aaron Borbach, Carol Javna, Tikva Bat Avram, Philip Wessler, Paul Wax, and Donald Borabach, Devora Batsima, Sarah Story, Barbara Schwab, Alan Zaretsky, Leslie Schifrin, Charlie Zweig, Michael Rosenblatt, Truth Schapp, Randy Wasserman, Marcia Topowski, Sue Warter, Morris Kramer, Ann Baker, Jeffrey Schwartz, Kim Birnbaum, Deborah Block-Kroll, Sylvia Orn, and that's our list for this evening, and I'll, of course, welcome those who are in the room with us. If you have additional names to share, we'll start on this side of the room and work our way this way, and, of course, invite those watching at home to share names of your loved ones as well. If anybody has names to share in the room, just raise a hand so I don't miss anybody.
Travis, Maria, Judy Wilson, Tracy, Maria, and Maureen.
Join together in the Misha Berach in the middle of page 371. Misha Berach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishe Berach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha Lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Gemar Chatima Tova. All right, so as I mentioned at the outset of our service, this is one of our periodic Ask the Rabbis, but this is the only one of the year that I think is fixed in place and has been, I think, since my first, Neil's saying yes. So as I said, you can ask anything. Try to keep a somewhat aware focus of the rest of the people in the room when you ask. You know, if it feels like an existential personal question, make an appointment with me. I'd be happy to talk at length with anybody. But I think probably more, that. And as I said, if you happen to have any High Holiday or Yom Kippur related questions, definitely ask me. And I will tell you, in my history, I've usually been able to answer in some way or the other. If I get stumped, brownie points to you. You get extra points, especially with Yom Kippur coming up, and I'll have an answer for you by the following week for sure. So I just need one friend in the room who might be willing to walk our microphone around to ask some questions. Anybody feel like they need a little exercise today that might be willing? All right, I can do a lot of things, people, from up here. A lot of things. These days, increasingly. But see, there's the president of the congregation stepping in. Thank you very much. Ron, thank you very much. I'd give you special dispensation to ask your first question if you wanted to, but I know Neil's primed, but ask away, people. Let's see what we can do. Okay.
I have a
good.
question for you, Rabbi.
Yes, Anne.
On Shabbat last Saturday, we had 7 aliyahs, and you explained that it was Shabbat.
Yes.
But what decides how many aliyahs? Sometimes there's 3, sometimes there's 5, and then sometimes there's 7.
Excellent question. Okay, so let's start from the first thing that we should acknowledge. If you look in the Torah for the answer to this question, you will not find. Why? Because the Torah is not that self-referential that it knows yet that there will be a Torah service like the one we know. That is a construct ultimately of the rabbis. And the rabbis actually discuss this at great length in the Talmud, and they have various reasons and rationales as to how they eventually come to the decisions that they come to. Principally speaking, let's build from small to big. There are a number of times during the year and during the week in which we read Torah. Okay, the one that you're most familiar with certainly is Shabbat, and of course the holidays themselves. But Mondays and Thursdays are also Torah reading times, and also on Shabbat at Mincha in the afternoon, we also read as well. So if you're reading on a regular Monday, it's not coinciding with any other holiday, it's just a regular Monday or Thursday. Does anybody know how many aliyahs you read? I was going to say, the rabbi in the back there, of course, knows the answer. Rabbi Allen knows the answer. 3, shalosh, okay? 3. So 3 is considered to be, generally speaking, sort of your, I don't want to call it a bare minimum, but that's the normal expected amount. And generally speaking, you're supposed to read at a minimum 10 verses of Torah, no less than that. So more often than not, for example, if you're with us and we're doing 3 aliyot, usually it will be 3 verses, and 4 to add up to 10. And then sometimes it's some various permutations of that. The service of Mincha, for example, in the afternoon on Shabbat, again, assuming it's not a holiday, there's no other things varying it, also 3 aliyot, and is the same reading for Monday and Thursday. So what happens basically is, and I know I'm answering this question in a roundabout way, but I'll get there. So on a regular Shabbat, let's just say like this one, even though it's Shabbat, it's sort of, generally considering, let's use a better example. A few weeks ago, you read the Torah reading you read in the morning on Shabbat morning. By the afternoon, you start reading the next week's Torah portion. And that is the establishing verses that are read both for that Saturday afternoon and for Monday and for Thursday. Okay, so we've established 3. So how do we get from 3 then to 5, which is the next sort of level up? So 5 is what's read on Rosh Hashanah, unless it's a Shabbat, which is how we get to our answer there. If I remember correctly, Rosh Chodesh, I think, also is 5, but Rabbi Allen, you might correct me on that one. And then Yom Kippur is 6, and Shabbat is 7. So under normal circumstances, if Rosh Hashanah doesn't fall on a Shabbat, 7, the maximal amount, is only experienced on Shabbat. But in the situations in which either Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur coincide with, then you up yourself to the Shabbat level. And so what challenged us here was that our Torah reading in the Machzor ends at verse 19, whereas traditionally it goes to verse 20-something. So when we tried to divide 7 by 19, it doesn't work. So that's why we had the additional reading of the birth of Rebecca, which is something that the Machzor added in as a piece there. So the bigger question you're asking is, how do the rabbis determine these figures? It's been a long time since I've studied that particular section of the Talmud, so I can't remember in enough detail to tell you why there are certain things win out. But as you can imagine, if we're just thinking for a second, the number 7. Okay, so the number 7 should ring certain bells in our tradition. It's our complete number, right? So having, for example, 8 aliyahs, 9 aliyahs, 10 aliyahs might make a certain kind of sense. But if we think about it within the construct of Shabbat, the construct of what a whole number is in Judaism, 7 is generally speaking your kind of idealized number. And then you have a sort of understanding that if that's the case, you can't go larger, you can certainly go smaller. And in the case of the readings that you have, for example, on Mondays and Thursdays, remember again, I'm sure all of you have nothing going on a regular Monday or Thursday morning. Okay, but most of the world has to get to work. And this was true even in the days in which the rabbis were constructing this as well, because if you think about it, if the rabbis created a system that couldn't function in the real world, forget Shabbat, right, the rest of the week, if it made everybody 2 or 3 hours late to work, it's not going to work, right? So that's why a lot of times actually the davening on a weekday service is faster, certain things are truncated and all of that, but it was still important to have Torah read at these various, sort of times and places. And, if I remember correctly, again, Yom Kippur kind of falling in this category of like, if Shabbat is still and you must understand this, as important as Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are to us today, Shabbat is still the apex. Okay, it's very important to understand that. So in this case, right, you're working sort of backwards in that way. And in the case of the Talmudic discourse, while I don't remember the specific reasoning of why we got to 6 or 5 for Rosh Hashanah, for example, it's not a unified agreement. There's a lot of different perspectives of different rabbis as to what ought to be the proper approach for various things, or they all agree on the number, but they have a different reason why that number is the number that it is. So I'll simply answer it for now, so we move on to the next question. But if anyone's interested in this, it's a good excuse for me to go back and study that particular section of Gemara, and it has all sorts of explanations, as I said, that go on for pages. But it's an excellent question. So in normal years, Rosh Hashanah is 5, Yom Kippur is 6, and Shabbat is 7, and whenever Shabbat coincides with, then it gets bumped up. And also, I should say, the other festivals are also 5, unless Shabbat coincides with. Good question. Okay, I think Neil had a question. Okay, you got to hold the mic, otherwise our friends at home can't hear you.
Why do we say on this holiday, Shana Tova? Why don't we just say Shana Tov?
Excellent. Okay.
So the feminine and
Very
masculine.
good. So I will tell you right at the outset that both in English and in Hebrew, my grammar skills are terrible. I learned most of my English grammar from playing Mad Libs when I was a kid. But this much I know about Hebrew grammar. So and know it mostly because Hebrew is somewhat like English in this way, and then it has a lot of exclusions to the rule, right? You learn the rule, for example, and it works 95% of the time, but 5% of the time it doesn't quite jive. In this case, it's one of the normal ones. So the word shana, okay, is the word for year. So that's the noun. Okay, tova is the thing that then adjusts it, gives it a quality, right? It's an adjective, correct? Good. Whew, thank God. My English teacher from years ago is sweating bullets at the moment. So what happens normally is the adjective adjusts to the noun. The noun determines the gender, and the adjective goes accordingly. So in this case, it's simple. Usually when you have a hey at the end of a word, more often than not, that's going to indicate the feminine in Hebrew. More often than not. That's, of course, where the exclusions come in. And then there are situations in which you think that the last letter is a hey, when in reality it's something entirely different, and there's some other grammatical thing that's modifying it, so you don't know that it's actually incorrect. So I'm trying to remember a good example in which you have a seemingly masculine sounding word that is actually a feminine word and therefore needs feminine adjectives, right? Huh? All right, perfect. Okay, thank you. Margaret, our expert now learning in Hebrew, right? The other time in which we say tov to other people, Shavua tov, okay? So Shavua tov is another example of this, right? That you get to the end, the Shavua is a week, right? So Shavua tov is have a good week. So we have a number of these circumstances, but there are a number of places in which you have a word that ultimately speaking should look and sound a certain way. But in the same way that when you say Shana Tov, right, something about it doesn't sound right to us. And more often than not, that's how you know in Hebrew and you learn in Hebrew what the exclusions are, is just by hearing them. And you'll say them out loud and you'll say that just doesn't sound quite right. So, I think, again, Margaret's been in Ulpan. So Ulpan, they'll just throw lots of stuff at you and you kind of learn it by osmosis. But if you're actually studying the grammar, if you're learning Hebrew on paper, like the way that academics will generally learn Hebrew, you will learn the grammar first and you'll learn all of its rules and you'll learn actually how to predict a lot of times where there's a variance. But in this case, it's actually simple Hebrew grammar, right? Shana is feminine, Tova is feminine, they match up with each other. But, if I were to say, Neil is Tov, Neil Hayat Tov, right? We drop the hey at the end of it because you're Neil. So now where this gets very complicated, and actually there is a tremendous amount of work being done in Israel currently on this, knowing that Hebrew is a gendered language, that there is a strong push, as there is in the United States as well, in terms of acknowledging the various forms and identifications of gender. How do you deal with that? In English, it's much easier in most cases. We still have our challenges, but in Hebrew it's much more challenging. And so there are people who are working on creating, including something like, for example, the word b'nai mitzvah or bar bat mitzvah. So a number of congregations are adopting b mitzvah as a way of being as inclusive as possible of various genders on the gender spectrum. So Hebrew, again, sometimes feels like it's stuck in one place in history, but wonderfully so can be brought into the modern world. And just as the last word before we get to the next, just a reminder to everybody that the modern language of Hebrew is a modern language. It was constructed almost exclusively in its beginnings by a single person, reconstructed, I should say. Hebrew as a spoken language is essentially a handful of places and circumstances outside of prayer. But for the most part, we started speaking Yiddish or Arabic or wherever it was that we were living, Aramaic, as the primary language. So Hebrew, it's, I want to say it's Yitzhak ben Tzvi. I'm trying to remember. Is that right? Is it Ben Yehuda? Right, so it's Ben Yehuda. So Ben Yehuda, right, and there was an institute in Jerusalem that we called the Word Factory when we were there. And whenever there's a new word that appears in the world, someone actually has to sit down and try to figure out what that word is. So, my favorite one is the verb lefasbek, which I doubt anybody's going to, Margaret will know. If I said it in English, you'd know. It means to Facebook. So, okay, question in the back, I can see. Bonnie.
So when you talked about the binding of Isaac and that this was not a child, and I was really moved to think a lot about that since. And I guess I would like to hear you talk more about that,
Sure.
And particularly because when we sort of, ponder Isaac as a fully grown adult, he has agency,
Right.
and that really changes a lot in the
lot of the
calculation
story.
here. So would love to hear you talk
Excellent
about that.
question. So Bonnie's referring also, just in case anybody wasn't here for second day of Rosh Hashanah, if you really, really wanted to, you can certainly go back and watch it on YouTube. You can see the explanation. But what I shared was a midrash, one of many, on the binding of Isaac on the Akedah, in which it, rather than positioning Isaac as an infant, which for many of us, I don't know, just out of curiosity, how many of you, when you think of the story of the binding of Isaac, that's the first image that you have, is of a baby or an infant of some sort? Don't be shy. I mean, the truth is, is the reality is that many people would think that, largely because a lot of times the visual representation, especially from the Renaissance, and most of the great painters of the Renaissance, is that of a child or an infant, or certainly something that is not going to have the agency like a 37-year-old, as was described in the Midrash. The challenge comes from the Hebrew and the way in which the Hebrew describes Isaac in that story. So it doesn't use the word, for example, yeled, which would be the boy, and it doesn't use the word tinok or tinoket as a baby. It uses the word na'ar. And so the way it's often translated in the text is a lad, I think, where you often see that's the description. And it's a wonderfully ambiguous thing in English as it is in the Hebrew. And I suspect that depending on the translation that you grew up with, right, whatever you were working with in the Jewish world or in the non-Jewish world, it has a very significant impact on the way that Isaac is portrayed in the story. And the rabbis don't come to a particularly great conclusion on this. The vast majority of them really understand that, as we discussed, that Midrash is a way of seeing a straightforward core text in a lot of different ways and a lot of different variations. And I think, to me, the most relevant piece of it is exactly what happened to you this week, Bonnie, right? Is by hearing the fact, even if it's for the first time, right, that this story has the possibility of a different read, and what that different read says to me hearing that story. That's the beauty of Midrash, right? That's the beauty of sort of exploring what, however many times we've heard that story and understood it and felt like we understood it and took away the lesson of it. Changing the age of a central character in that story changes that story a great deal. And so I think, to me, that's one of the reasons why I brought it actually in its entirety, right? Told the Midrash as it was, because I didn't want to paraphrase it. I wanted to show that this was the rabbis, 1,500 years ago, right? Taking this text that was handed to them and saying, how can I create a commentary around this, a narrative commentary in the form of Midrash that's going to help people, other than, I always assume, right, the writer of the Midrash, creator of the Midrash, has to have a question in their mind to begin with, right? What are they seeking out in creating this Midrash in the first place? And my guess is, again, more often than not, it resonates with the same kinds of questions we ask today, which is primarily, right, how can a father sacrifice his infant child? Again, doesn't make it a lot better, but it makes it very different when that child is not a child, but a fully grown adult. Margaret.
So this question might lead to a larger conversation about Reform Judaism, but I noticed we blew the shofar on Saturday.
Yes.
And that's not true in all Reform congregations.
Correct.
And I don't think has always been true here. So how are those decisions made? How do we come to that or make decisions about that?
Excellent. So I'll work backward from the last question, which is, how is the decision made? In this case, generally speaking, it's made by the Mora D'Atra, being I. That's the Aramaic phrase that describes basically when a rabbi is in a community and they are a rabbinic decisor when a situation comes up. Now, here's the caveat to that. as Margaret points out, just so everyone knows the halacha says that if Rosh Hashanah falls on a Shabbat, you don't blow shofar. Why? Not because of what most people might immediately assume, which is, right, loud musical instruments, right? Seems antithetical to Shabbat. Musical instruments seems antithetical to Shabbat. Also above mice, not correct, right? The main concern actually has to do with a different halachic rule around carrying. Okay, so the concern of the rabbis, this is one of those, for those that have been in my Torah study class, we talk about them all the time, as what's called a siyag Torah, a fence around the Torah. So it's a rule on top of a rule, with the understanding that the average person, just not thinking or not knowing the halacha themselves, will grab their shofar in their house and then carry it to shul, which is a no-no. Okay, you can carry within your home, and you can carry within a synagogue, and there's a complicated conversation for another time, you can carry certain limited things within an eruv, okay? But not every place has an eruv, right? And especially in the rabbinic world in their era, you know, other than a small eruv around a small Jewish neighborhood, maybe. But you're not going to get an eruv like, you know, technically what goes around major cities or things like that. So the idea basically was they didn't want people violating Shabbat by carrying the shofar too. Okay, but still, to this day, if you are halakhically observant, you will not blow shofar on Shabbat. Even if you're in your own home, generally speaking, you won't do it as a result of this halacha. So how do we then get to Reform Judaism, Reform Judaism's element of this? This is actually a tshuva, a rabbinic decision from, I believe, the 1930s. And you can actually go up and look on it online. You can read it and read its rationale and exactly how it played out. The logic was this. Although Rosh Hashanah in the Torah is a 2-day holiday, okay, most of you know the sort of traditions around observing other holidays for 2 days is an added layer of things that since, right, the creation of phones and satellites that tell us exacting times and exacting days, it's related to Rosh Chodesh. We don't have to celebrate 2 days of Yantif, for example, for Sukkot or for Pesach, okay? Rosh Hashanah is different because it actually says in the Torah it's a 2-day holiday. It's not an added anything, it's supposed to be 2 days. So the logic, of course, of the original halacha is we're not telling people they're not going to hear the shofar because there's a day 2. Okay, everybody will come back for day 2 and everybody will hear the shofar and everything will be fine. So herein lies the rub, right? Most Reform communities, especially in the United States, especially in the earlier days of Reform Judaism, got rid of the second day entirely. So most communities only had 1 day. So in the event that it fell on Shabbat, and in the event that they followed that particular practice of not blowing the shofar, what would then happen? Wouldn't hear it. Okay? So the thinking was, right, if the halacha that's preventing this from happening is a siyag Torah, right, something that's already an added layer on top of a halacha that quite frankly doesn't apply in Reform situations in any case in the 1930s, because halacha in general is not incumbent upon everybody. It's just a choice of the individual to follow or not follow. It's a more complicated issue than that. But in this particular case, right, the decision is, in order to affect and to make sure that the maximum number of Jewish people in a community hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, which is its primary mitzvah, right, the thing we are obligated to hear, that ultimately pretty easily supersedes. Now, we get back to the question of how it is that we came to do it here, especially those that knew Rabbi Morris, right? Rabbi Morris, you would assume, wouldn't have done it. And it's impossible that that was the case at some point. But when I was sitting with him in our old office back over yonder that's now probably the bathroom, and he was trying to tell me in a matter of an hour or two how to run High Holiday services here at the temple, that was the first question, because that first High Holidays was, in fact, a Shabbat. And young Rabbi Dan, who knew far less than Rabbi Dan knows now, speaking in the third person already, that's not a good sign, right? I was surprised when he told me, no, blow shofar, okay? Blow shofar, because even though this community has a second day, empirically, knowledgeably, it is far fewer people who come on the second day. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but just a simple reality. So if you didn't blow shofar again on that first day, you would have potentially hundreds of people who not only miss out on the joy of hearing the shofar, but actually will also not have done the thing that they are obligated to do. So the question is a really excellent question, Margaret, and especially complicated in Reform communities because there isn't a single halachic body like there is in the conservative movement or in the Orthodox movements. In those cases, rabbis far beyond me would be making all sorts of decisions that I would then follow. But in the Reform movement, it really is a situation in which each individual community, usually in some consult with their rabbi, determines in a situation like this where you have to make a choice, which is the more important thing to follow. But it's an excellent, excellent question. So I think we have time maybe for one more question. Okay.
So why is it not blown on Friday night of Shabbat, but
so
only Saturday morning?
excellent question. In my experience, this I'd have to look back and see if it's halachic or whether it's just minhag. But growing up, I never heard shofar on an Arab service. So, in other words, that you would go, if anybody went to the Arab service to begin with, right? That was not part of that service at all. And in general, the shofar is generally blown in the morning, not in the evening. So like during the month leading up to a Elul, it's blown in the morning. So the question as to why is an excellent question. I'll have to look into that and to see. But as far as I know, I mean, if anybody has a different experience, I'd love to hear it. But growing up, for example, in a conservative shul, I don't have any recollection of hearing it in the evening. But I'm not sure if that's by design or just by some sort of custom that developed. But I'm going to get a better answer for you for the next time for sure.
To follow on that
Sure.
question, isn't the shofar blown at the conclusion of the Yom Kippur fast?
Right. So it's the only time, but it's for example, it's blown not in a halachic way. In other words, that's not part of the holiday or an expectation of the holiday. My likely guess is that is a custom that developed over some period of time in which to close out Ne'ilah with a shofar blast. But the halachic responsibility to hear the sound of the shofar is tied exclusively to Rosh Hashanah.
And for the Yom HaShofar, is it for Rosh Hashanah? Is it a mitzvah? Would you say? Or?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. No. Exactly. And I should. When I'm using the word obligated, in this case, I should have been more clear. It really is a mitzvah in the literal sense of mitzvah. It's commanded. That's one of the things actually. It's in the Torah itself, which gives us the sense of why that's so important. Because there's certain, basically, Jewish law falls into two broad categories. One is called deoraita, which is the Aramaic term for something that comes from the Torah, or is the Hebrew word for light. So deoraita is the word that's used as a sort of euphemism for Torah, and derabanan, which are things that were created ultimately by the rabbis. And whenever there's a conflict between the two of those things, the deoraita always wins, right? The Torah always wins out over rabbinic something or other. But excellent question. All right, I think one last question to Deb.
What is the origin of fasting? And also, is it seen as like a positive cleansing, or is it seen as something like a punishment, like you can't eat because you are repenting?
Excellent question. So it's layered, so I'll try to answer it as quickly as I can. First is in the Torah itself, right? When the Torah is talking about Yom Kippur, if you opened up your Tanakhs in the rows here, my guess is what you would find is refers to it as a day to afflict oneself. Okay, so this idea of afflicting oneself, again, I'd have to look at the Hebrew to remember exactly what that is, but I suspect it's one of those words that can be translated a lot of different kinds of ways. But the fasting and the whole process of fasting, a lot of that really in the end is rabbinic. And Yom Kippur is not the only fast day of the year. There are a number of them spread out throughout the year. And there's a whole section of the Talmud that deals with what's called Ta'anit, right? It's just the section that deals with fasting and the various reasons why we fast on a certain day in a certain way and for certain kinds of reasons. But I think that what the rabbis do is they take this idea of afflicting oneself, but they clarify it so that we don't become, I always forget what that sect of Christianity is, but there's a sect of Christianity with what's called self-flagellation. You see these guys come out basically with whips, and they whip themselves. They physically afflict themselves. So that is born out of a certain amount of taking an idea to its extreme in that way. The rabbis basically look at it more like, a day in which you purposely remove certain things, you distance yourself from certain comforts. So, we're most familiar with the fasting piece of it, but fasting fits within a larger category of these things that we do, one of which is, right, we're not supposed to bathe, we're not supposed to shave, we're not supposed to put on perfumes or colognes, we're not supposed to wear leather shoes because in those days leather shoes was considered a joyful, special thing to be able to wear, which is the reason why you'll see me wearing white Vans. Some people choose to wear, things that are rubber made as opposed to leather made. It's actually very similar in a lot of ways to the customs that developed around mourning. Things like, for example, you're not even really supposed to look at yourself in the mirror. You're not supposed to care at all about right? And the fasting is an affliction of a sort. And all of us will know by the end of Yom Kippur, right? You start to feel a certain kind of way. You're not doing something pleasant or positive to yourself in that way. So indeed, the rabbis basically say that there is a physical component to it, right? We distance ourselves from things that distract us. We take away from the things that bring us an otherwise sort of joyful idea. And we sort of remove from ourselves spiritually all of the blocking things that keep us from getting to the deepest parts of ourselves. And remember again, the rabbis are certainly concerned about how we treat each other. But Yom Kippur is really much more fundamentally about how we relate to God, right? When we do Kol Nidre is really very specifically about vows we make to God. Our relationship to human beings is the work we're supposed to be doing now between the holidays. Okay, so all of that stuff, right, all of that sense of affliction, I think could easily be read as a negative, right, as take something away from yourself. But I and the rabbis have generally tried to refocus that much more on the sense of, during the rest of the year, we have all sorts of things that take our attention. Good things, bad things, in-between things, mundane things. But every one of those things, in the end, closes our view, some form or the other. Okay, so the more that we take away the distracting elements, including our concern about what we're going to have for lunch, what we're going to have for dinner, believe you me, and I'm sure actually many of you have been in this situation if you've ever been in shared life with somebody else in your house. Just figuring out what you're going to eat for dinner can sometimes be a half an hour or an hour long argument. Believe it or not, the simplest things, you take that stuff off the table, right? You stop worrying about, what's the next meal? What am I eating? Where am I going? What am I wearing? What do I smell like? What do my hair look like? All those kinds of things. Suddenly you walk in the door and you're freed from a lot of that. The challenge, of course, is that in our environment, right, that's not generally speaking how everybody is going to operate, right? I'm sure plenty of people will come to shul dressed as they normally would, wearing the cologne or perfume they may normally be wearing, etc. I'm less concerned with whether, people are following, that list of concerns, and more actually what's really at the heart of your question, which is what are we actually supposed to do on this day? And to me, the idea of afflicting myself is not it. That piece is not it. I don't find that Yom Kippur is more meaningful to me the more I beat myself up. I did that as a kid, right? I did that as a kid growing up, as a teenager, right? I spent my Yom Kippurs kind of doing the al-chet too hard, right? That's one of my core teachings, right? When we do the vidui, when we do this, you're not punching yourself, right? It's like knocking on a door. You're just trying to open yourself up. That's it. All right. So that's my perspective, as it were. All right, Linda, I think we'll give you the last question before we lose everybody to.
I was just wondering, the calendar, when did it begin? Was it a specific event that started? I know it's 784, but
what is it? Yeah.
Exactly.
Excellent question. Always a good one. So that is counting from creation. So according to the rabbinic way of thinking of Rosh Hashanah, right, that new year is the celebration of the new year counting since creation. There are actually 5 New Years mentioned in the Torah. There's the New Year of the trees, there's the New Year of Kings, there's the New Year of creation, there's the New Year of tithing, and there's the New Year, I think, of one more that I'm forgetting. Oh boy, see, you put me on the spot, I've forgotten. But in those cases, right, but the way that we think about and how we get that date of 57, that's actually one person, if I remember correctly. And I think actually when Sharon Mintz was here, I think if she was talking about that, I forget exactly how that got constructed, but it's Torah based, right? Somebody did sort of mathematics using Torah as a guide. Obviously, for those of us living in the modern world with a certain kind of modern sensibility, 5784 seems a little slight. So our concern with that, generally speaking, in terms of the calendar counting years, at least for me, I fit that into the category of a number of other things that I'm less concerned about whether that's the actual number, and more just thinking along the lines of that, this is what every other Jewish community in the world sees as our time frame, right? And we are connected in that way. The rest of the Jewish calendar is actually a very interesting conversation. The Hebrew word is a luach. And so the luach actually is a much more complicated conversation, which, truth be told, I'd love to actually bring somebody who's an expert in it to come, because it's confusing even to those that know it. The great news is now we have computers that do almost all of the work for us. So if you wanted to know when Shabbos is in the year 2075 and what time to light candles in Sag Harbor or in Moscow, you can go to a website and it will tell you all of that information with exacting detail. But in the days of our ancestors, this was more a construct, right? An idea. And so, again, what 5,000 years to us seems like nothing when we think of the world being billions of years. But to the ancient world, 1,000 years was an eon. A year was in some cases more than, people's life expectancy. So, you have to always have a certain understanding of our place in kind of history and in present. And as I said, whenever I run up against one of those, science versus religion kind of things, as we talk about here, I tend to be less fixated on the validity of it and more in the essence of the ritual that helps us to count time in a sacred way. And that, I think, is really what the Luach is really about. It's an excellent question. All right, so I will answer any other questions you've got. President Ron, thank you very much for jumping in, as always. We appreciate that. And we'll turn now to page 586. You all look like you're glued to the chairs, wrapped in attention. We'll turn to page 586, Aleinu L'Shabech, the very top of the page. Aleinu L'Shabech, Ladon HaKol, Latet Gedula Leotzer Breshit, Shelo Asanu Kegoye Aratzot, Velo Samanu Kemishpechot Adama, Shelo Samachelkenu Kahem, Vegor Aleinu Kechol Hamonaham, Vanahachnu Korim, Umishtachavim, Umodim, Lifnei Melech Malchei Hamlachim, Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Page 591. V'nehemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Ask those in mourning, those observing yahrzeit to please remain standing. Everyone else may be seated at this time. We think first of those who passed in our community in recent months. Bernd Bitterman, Julian Busgang, Morty Schwatsky, Beverly Deshevsky, Jerry Goldsmith, Dr. Sam Gould, Sandy Greenwald, Dorothy Klein, Sean Leibowitz, Jane London, Marvin Schreier, Sandy Slip, Barbara Strasser, and David Weinstein. We also mark the yahrzeits that occurred during the last week for Philip Abrams, Joseph Alderman, Morris Appel, Mary Bernstein, Herbert Beanstock, Selma Bush, Norma Cantor, Dorothy Cohn, Ray Cohn, Bess Davis, Sidney Epstein, Elizabeth Field, Samuel Fuchs, Leo Goldstein, Diane Gordon, Ellen Grossman, Gustav Gruen, George Horowitz, Renee Kern, Claudio Lemos, Bette Levine, Julia Meyerson, Rose Moskowitz, Joseph Nadell, Ruth Ohl, Bertus Oglensky, Abraham Peller, Philip Person, William Racklin, Fred Rosenberg, Shirley Ernestine Spitz. In addition to those names, if anyone else is saying Kaddish that we did not mention? Oh, you know what, that happened. Don't worry. Don't worry. And I'll make sure to get her name for next week, so we'll have it on for sure. I'll invite the mourners to join with me on page 598, and if it's your custom, you may rise as well. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, b'agala u'v'zman kariv v'yimru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach la'alam u'li'almei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, V'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yit'halal shemei dekudsha b'richu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'yimru amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu yaseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. Okay, please be seated again. Shabbat shalom, everyone. Shana tova, Gemar chatima tova. A few announcements that I'm pretty sure Shelley left for me. These ones are important for sure. So, of course, we hope that you will join us tomorrow morning for services. It looks like the weather may be not great. I will be here. If it's safe to you, you are welcome to join me here. If you feel like it's not safe, by all means, stay at home. You can watch on our stream as always. Just a couple of important things related to this Shabbat, mostly out of advice from our COVID council. As you'll see, there is no Oneg or Kiddush this weekend. So that means for tomorrow, Torah study, we can't really have Torah study in person and not feed people. So it's going to be on Zoom. It's happening. It's just on Zoom. So the service will end here with enough time for anybody who comes here to get home and be on Zoom if they want to. We hope to resume that really, after the holidays. Also, a reminder, of course, Yom Kippur, Kol Nidre begins here, our service at 7:30, again, streaming live on YouTube and on our website as well. Just a quick rundown of Monday's services, 10 o'clock to join us here for the main service. 2:30 will be family services upstairs for the younger kids. Teens will be downstairs with Cantor Kevin. Mincha services beginning at 3:30. Usually there's a little bit of a break between Mincha and Yizkor, which will begin at 5:30. Neila begins immediately, flows right in from Yizkor. And we're able to do this for the first time in years, which is we're going to welcome our little ones, our younger people, hopefully dressed in white or something close to it, to fill up the stage here for Havdalah at the end. So if you have children and grandchildren, some kids who might enjoy this, bring them to the temple 6:45. We're going to gather them downstairs, or actually come at 6:30, and I think we're getting them pizza and stuff so they can eat. And then the last shofar blowing will be at 7 o'clock. Again, we hope that you'll join us here in person for as much of that as possible. Those that are watching online, though, every service other than the family service will be streamed as well. Also, a reminder, we thank Rabbi Alan Levin, who's been teaching this wonderful course on the Jewish holidays, speaking of holidays. And so, Alan, maybe this is one we can throw into your classes, talking a little bit about the Luach, right, and get some details there. It's not too late to sign up for his virtual class on the holiday of Sukkot. That is going to be Wednesday evening, next Wednesday. Just remember, registration is required. Also, Wednesday afternoon, we'll be putting the sukkah up at 2 o'clock. And thanks to Shelley's brilliance of asking our builders, who know a little bit about building, how we might construct a sukkah that won't get knocked down for the first time in all of my years. So I don't want to, I realize I've just, whatever that is, poo is how we would say. But it will be a really lovely sukkah that we are very excited to have, and we're as always, we'll have some things that are planned and programmed, but also we'll invite people, if you're in the neighborhood, you want to come have lunch, have a meal, just clean up after yourselves, very important, and of course are welcome to join it. And a reminder that we'll get to Sukkot when we get past Yom Kippur, but Sukkot services, Erev services, and Shabbat services coincide again at the beginning, and we're going to have pizza in the hut, weather permitting, one of our all-time favorite kinds of things. So, Anne. Yes, I believe the decision, yes, everybody's bated breath. Same logic, basically, of the advice, again, of our doctors in the community, that eating presents a particularly high level risk of COVID spreading, and given that we had this experience a few weeks ago, we're a little bit on the cautious side. So at the same time, we realize we can't just have people here and not give them something they're going to need to get from here to wherever a breakfast may be. So we're going to have pre-wrapped bagels, creams, and bagels with cream cheese and lock, orange juice, and apple juice, and an apple. So in other words, enough certainly that nobody should be concerned about not having food on premises should you be fasting. We'll make sure everybody has that. But in terms of a more joyful kind of break fast, we're hoping to get back to that next year. But weather permitting, right, everybody's welcome to grab their bagels and come hang out. I'll still be here. We'll still be hanging out for sure. But yes, I'm glad you asked about that, Ann, because we certainly don't want anybody being surprised by that. Okay, I think my announcements were almost as long as my sermons on the holidays, but to me, that's always a sign of good things, right? You got a shul, got a lot going on. If I forgot anything, I apologize, but again, services tomorrow, 10 o'clock, will welcome you. I hope, yes, I do have Kish and Motzi ready to go. So, we'll turn to page 123 for Kiddush, and you are welcome to rise if you're with us here in the room. Again, page 123. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho b'hava uvratzon inchilanu, zikaron lemahaseh v'reishit, ki hu yom techila lemikrae kodesh, zecher letziat Mitzrayim, Ivanu v'acharta, ve'otanu kidashta, mikol ha'amim, v'shabbat kodshecha, ve'ahava uvratzon inchaltanu, Baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen. I should also mention, because it won't show up on the camera, we welcome back Bonnie, mother of Cantor Lauren, student Cantor Lauren, boyfriend David, so of course you could say hello. We miss her terribly, but all the more amazing, right? When the mother of a former student Cantor comes back to hang out with us on Shabbat, that's a connection. That's a real thing. So Bonnie, we love seeing you anytime. You know, you are welcome here. Nothing to do with Lauren, just you, and David, of course, welcome to join anytime. So with that, we'll do Motzi and we'll wish each other a Shabbat Shalom, a Shana Tova, and a Gemar Chatima Tova. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Good Shabbos, everyone. This is something edible, though. So anybody who would like some challahs, here we go. Or put this somewhere. Anybody wants challah, come and grab it. We got it. Those are, I don't even know if we have a table, but maybe we could put it by the door, I guess. Yes, we do. Okay. All right. Shabbos. Okay. Great question. Great question. Always great question. I feel like I learn more from the Ask the Rabbi than anybody else does, because I'm like, yeah. If you remember, will you tell me? I love it. That's what happens, though. But you know what? It'll come back to you like I know. Just write it down. I'll just, I love questions. Questions are it. That's great. Well, safe travels back to Greenport. You know. Oh, you great. I'll tell that's a small world. That's really fun. Great to meet you, really. Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. Yes, that's right. Any one of them. Any of them, you guys are right here. I don't know whether my study seminar lived up to what you're doing in English, but I know there's so many people. There's a classmate of mine, a wonderful guy. If you ever come across I hear that entirely. No, London also is that, its own reality. England itself is own reality. Yeah. Please, for sure. Hopefully. No, absolutely. By all means. Take more than a tiny bit. Take as much as you can. We actually don't do it as part of the congregation. I still to this day when I go home, it's the rare case that I'm over to Shabbat this week. Maybe twice in the last 10 years. I hope still last days with my brother, my sister. Yeah, so very much in our house. I grew up in that place. No. Yeah, exactly right. Thanks so much. Great questions. Great questions. I really love it. I'll see you soon. No, today's, believe it or not, is answers to all of them. Because it's the real trick is what happens when you leave. Right? Because it's always so it's really fascinating. But that's why I was saying I think there are people who really know it well, and they know all of these sort of intricate shift things that happen when it's the same thing. Like certain things get adjusted, right? So like sleep. If sleep doesn't appear, I forget
Rosh Hashanah is on a Sunday. Then Slichot is 2 week Shabbos before, because there's not enough days of Slichot, you know. But it's again, it's like the construct of it is all so granular, exactly, and it's the only thing that would make sense is the only other like I don't know how else to say it, it's like calendar movies, right? It's like you can picture them. They're all it's like that subset of rabbinic mind. It's like no, for sure. Yes, that is true. I think we've done the opposite of what we intended, right? This is, yes, listen, that's exactly right. Maybe we should bring that. Maybe we should bring that bottle after the outer table. By the way, are you missing a house? Because I haven't contacted them. Yes, see you tomorrow. I hope so, but do what's safe for you. I hope so. I love the LC, but that's just be safe. That's always my main concern.
Well, we also, it might be different if we could get a sense, we could get a CO, so we have a CO, they want us to get a sense, and to have it indoors, you know, with people eating, and a lot of people, you know what? Yeah, and then there were some, who say, come on, not over it. But, at least, something that's going on in the parking lot.
Shelly's not here. Yeah. So the rule basically is they're not members, they're welcome to any service, but they would just be downstairs lodging. If there's space up here, we always okay. Yeah, first of all, they would just enter through the back door, just like Rosh Hashanah. Just like Rosh Hashanah. Okay. No worries. Thanks. No worries.